Hello everybody, my name is Jackson, and today, it's going to be a good day. And you can tell it's going to be a good day because you get to see a rare instance of my disgusting little legs. I want to talk about Random Access Memories, the fourth and last studio album from acclaimed electronic band, Daft Punk. And this album is quite an interesting oddity when it comes to their discography. Their past three albums have been heavily French house and electronic focused, producing bangers involving many samples from older records of the 1970s and 80s that they chopped up and remixed. And as I was gradually getting more and more into their music, discovering that songs like Harder, Better, Faster, Stronger, or Digital Love, or Robot Rock, or almost anything off of Discovery were comprised of samples and melodies that the duo hadn't created wholly themselves, kind of put me in a heavy state of shock. There was this part of me that really wanted to believe that these melodies were created by them because I had such adoration for the music, and it felt kind of weird to discover, someone else wrote this song. And over time, I slowly got over this heartbreak and eventually found solace in the idea that Daft Punk have this innate creative ability to take an intro of a song that they loved and could twist it and contort it into this all-new beat, simultaneously making a banger of their own, but also introducing these classic songs to a new generation. I know I certainly would have gone my entire life without hearing Coke Bottle Baby, and now I know of it and the musician behind it because of Harder, Better, Faster, Stronger. It was a strange love affair that I had with their specific use of sampling, but one that I found appreciation for over time. Bringing this topic to Random Access Memories, this album is an outlier in their discography because it's the first to rely solely and heavily on live instrumentation with very minimal usage of sampling, of existing songs. Rather, the band had commissioned session musicians to come into a studio and basically record live, authentic versions of demos Daft Punk had been toying around with, eventually having a plethora of audio samples of these demos and ideas and drumming loops and whatnot to start piecing together. This partially inspired the album's title, Random Access Memories, with how a computer RAM can store large amounts of data and be able to recall bits and pieces of it at will. And the sound of this record almost completely ditches the electronic dance beats that the duo were basically celebrated for. Instead, the album pays heavy homage to those exact same songs of the 70s and 80s that inspired the band in so many ways, and thusly sounds like it was plucked straight out of that era. There are so many songs on this that sound like a dead ringer for something in that time period, and that's the exact feeling that the band wanted to channel when producing this record. There are countless features on this album, one such being Nile Rodgers from the band Chic, who performs on a few tracks here, bringing his signature rhythm guitar that's just, you gotta love that waka chicka waka chicka waka chicka. His parts were recorded at the famous Electric Lady Studios that was founded by Jimi Hendrix. And that's not to forget all of the other fantastic places and studios that this album was recorded at. Mick Guzowski, who has worked with Celine Dion and Madonna and Michael Jackson, was hired on as a mixing engineer, and this album sounds amazing. For being conceived and constructed from hefty amounts of scattered samples and loops, the mixing is impeccable, and the vibrancy of the textures and just the quality of the sounds is remarkable. In listening to this album all the way through for this video, I sat in my car in the dead of night, just with quietness around me so that I could fully appreciate just how freaking tight everything sounds, and it was a magical experience to say the least. You put on Lose Yourself to Dance and you're like, oh, I'm ready to groove, and then you put on Get Lucky and it's like, oh, I'm ready to groove, and you put on Touch and it's just like, whoa. I've blabbered on for enough now. The main thing I wanted to do was go through the track listing and just appreciate each song on the record, as well as provide some behind the scenes of how they were made, and just generally gush about how much I freaking love this album. In the music in tonight, just turn on the music, let the music in tonight, give life back to music. God, it's so good. A great way to start off the album, and a great track to demonstrate the kinds of vibes and feelings the listener is about to experience. It's about feeling the music, and the scrupulous amount of detail that went into making this album reflects that. The groovy guitar riffs from Nile Rodgers and the robotic Daft Punk vocals, all just encouraging the listener to just feel the music. I love it. I love the glittering little twinkles that you can hear in the mix, and just overall this song is just, it's a great song. It's not about making a club banger, it's not about making a quick 3-minute dance track, it's about creating this space for the listener to get absorbed in and feel the music rushing through your body like energy. I sound like a hippie saying this, but if you give this album its appropriate and optimal listening environment, it has such power to move you in more ways than one. Also, the name Give Life Back to Music brings about an interesting little factoid about why the band chose not to tour this album. Thomas Bangalter explained it. What's his name? Thomas Bangalter. Thomas Bangalter. You know who I'm talking about. Thomas Bangalter explained it perfectly in this interview with Zane Lowe, but I'm afraid to show any clips from it because of all the copyrighted Daft Punk tracks that are playing in the background that was really annoying to listen to when listening to the whole interview.
It feels also right now, when we think about it, that the lacking life in the recordings that we're just speaking about, the fact of those magical recordings that were full of life, and right now a lot of electronic recordings that are just like this kind of bounce to disc a piece of data, that a lot of this life right now is happening on stage and in festivals and in concerts, and where people are somehow much more excited by live experience that by the records themselves, where right now we just spent 5 years working on this record, trying to bring life back to the art of recording, which is something quite technical, but the idea is that okay, we worked with all these people, all these performers, and really try to deliver a piece of recorded audio that has a lot of life into it. Can it recontextualize somehow the value of recorded music as being something quite magical or mystical or elevated, in the way that some Pink Floyd albums or Led Zeppelin albums or Stevie Wonder albums where really this recorded audio adds somehow some kind of value.
I can personally relate to this because whenever I hear a studio recording that I like, usually when I hear a live version of it or a live studio recording of it, it has such a different energy that really amps me up more, and it makes the studio version feel almost inferior to a respect. So it makes sense that they would not want to tour this album, because they spent 5 years making this record sound the way that it does, to capture this live energy and put it back into the music itself, and bringing that on stage would perhaps take away from some of that magic they spent so long trying to perfectly recreate. I mean, I think Dick Darkley would beg to differ, but I think it's a good point nonetheless. This is a game of love. This is a game of love. And it was you. A simply gorgeous track where I first have to compliment the amazing drum sounds on this song and just on the whole album as well. They always feel present, the kicks really kick, and the snares have such distinct power yet feel so fluid in the mix. There's those rhythm guitars that give the song momentum, and for such a sensually somber song, the robotic vocals, oddly enough, sound buttery smooth, especially with the harmonies towards the end of the track. Thomas even said that he felt the recorded human voice was processed to try and feel robotic. And so their intentions on Random Access Memories was to create robotic vocals with expressiveness and emotion. And they're beautiful. And I love especially when the French accent comes out on a couple lines like, "And it was you, the one that would be breaking my heart." I did it in the beginning. "When you decided to walk away." I can't sing, but you get the idea. It's a very beautiful track coming off of a very energetic starter. It's a lovely track. Oh my god. Such a great track. I honestly don't know where to begin with this one. Well, for starters, I love how this song seamlessly carries over from the Game of Love, with the same similar chord progression being drowned out by the dining crowd. It just so wonderfully transitions the two tracks, and I really appreciate it. I love it. Secondly, this was the first song I had ever listened to that had this specific form of sampling where it's just a guy talking in front of a backing beat, and it was so weird but interesting to hear on first listen. It just wasn't something that I had heard much of before, but I quickly grew to just absolutely love it, because a few minutes can go by of the same backing beat and I can just get completely lost and absorbed in what the person is saying. In this case, the introductory monologue from Giovanni Giorgio helps set up this just behemoth of a symphonic track. The first half of the song is about him talking about his life, and especially when creating music, and then he goes on to talk about how when you have no preconceptions in your mind of music being correct or a certain way to do things, then you can do whatever you want. And I feel like that is what sort of this entire song represents. And aside from that amazing beat drop, this song carries the listener so elegantly through a great Daft Punk beat that then leads to a luscious orchestra of strings that then leads into another amazing amazing drum break, and this whole track is just phenomenal. The motif of the click track that comes back in at the end of the song, the record scratching that kind of flies along with the melody, and just the phased arpeggios, and everything about this song is just wonderful, and it just makes me smile. Ooh! It is just a fantastic journey, and not the last of its kind that you'll find on this album. There's also a pretty interesting story behind this track, where on the day that they interviewed Giorgio...
So then I come in, and they had 3 microphones and a chair, and I was supposed to talk. And why do they have three microphones? Well, they said the microphone on the left is a microphone of the 50s, or 40s actually. So when you talk about your life in Italy, they recording with that microphone. Then they had a microphone of the 60s, and that one, that's when you tell the story about the 70s. And then they had a new one, which I didn't know, and said, and what's that one? Oh, that's if you talk about the future. So I said, this is great, but who would ever know the difference? So he said, nobody. I said, so why are you doing it if nobody would hear the difference? Oh, he said, the 2 guys, they hear the difference.
Incredible.
And I just find that to be a very interesting technique for going all out for an interview on a song. Of course, I can't tell the frickin' difference, but I mean, it made a killer track, so I guess it worked out the way they had hoped it would. When considering the lengths of the other tracks on this album, this is a short and sweet little ballad with a smooth beat and a beautifully played intro by Chili Gonzalez. It's a wonderful little bit of improv that eventually finds its way into the main melody, and this song overall hasn't really grown on me very well over time. It's a nice track, but the robotic vocals, specifically on the chorus, feel a bit awkward with the harmonies and the backing melodies. It just feels kind of whiny. This nitpick is really just for the chorus. I can still lose myself to this song, and it doesn't really irritate me that much. It's really the only thing I can nitpick about anything on this entire record. Not a bad track, it's just not one that I find myself contagiously replaying when listening to this album again. Instant Crush, one of the more lyrically heavy songs on the album. Although his vocals can at times be practically unintelligible without the lyrics right in front of you, I really dig Julian Casablancas' vocals on this album. This is where the record picks up again. It's got that bit of a groovy track to it, and I have to mention the incredibly stellar guitar riff solo that happens near the end of the track. It's reminiscent of the guitar solo from Digital Love, from Discovery, and while it is criminally too short, I think it's my favorite part of the song. It's so smoky when it comes crashing. It takes you by surprise, and it just that's when the song gets into overdrive. I love it so much. Now, I'm not the most adept at deciphering lyrics, and most of the time I don't even look at them very much, as I'm more enthusiastic about the instrumental itself. But Julian sells his lyrics very well about this past relationship. It's something that really helps give the upbeat vibe of this track some darkness that looms overhead. And that smokiness really comes out when that guitar skewers in. You remember the oh, such a meaty track. It's so hard to not lose myself to dance with this song. That opening beat with that heavy bass and those dazzling twinkles to open the track. It's one of many mwahs I have to give for this record. This is the first of 2 songs on the record to feature Pharrell Williams, and his vocals are just as buttery smooth as the groovy beat is. I find myself not having much to say about these more single-esque tracks on the album. I mean, the mixing is obviously incredible, and the opening beat, how meaty and just heavy and dense it is incredible. There are these robotic vocals that eventually melt into these arpeggiated chants that just surround you. This track is also a good example of how, in an album context, it feels very appropriate, but when listening to it on its own, it kind of runs a little bit long. It reaches a point where most songs would call a natural conclusion at around the 3.5-4 minute mark, but then it just keeps going. Not in like an outro or an coda, it's just more to the song. It can be a bit weird when comparing it to traditional singles, but like I said, in the context of a full album listen, more of this song is never a bad thing. Plus, they did release a radio edit on Spotify, so I guess everybody wins in this scenario. I do want to stress that I received such a unique joy experiencing this album from beginning to end in one session than just picking out certain cuts that I want to listen to. Nowadays, and perhaps this is how it's always been, I feel like listeners rely on singles now more than they ever did. When I'm discovering new tracks on Spotify, I'll only really listen to 1 or 2 minutes of it before deciding if I like it or just forgetting about it entirely. Singles are that dopamine rush that we really want to hear, and since we don't have time to just listen to full album after full album, the catchiness of a song is almost paramount. Songs like Lose Yourself to Dance obviously have that groovy capability to catch ears on the dance floor, but its runtime is 6 minutes long, which is longer than most pop singles you'll hear today. And I love that they kept the longer version on the album, because for me, listening to the radio edit version is fine and good for its purpose, but when listening to the full album, having that extra space to get lost in the song is greatly appreciated, and makes the album's length feel like a journey and not just a playlist of different songs. Did I explain any of that well? I love it that it's long. I love that the songs are long because you can get lost in them more. But the fact that there are radio edits are good because you can listen to a radio edit and it's shorter and it's like it gets to the point faster. But I like longer songs because it's like, oh, when you're listening to the whole album, it's like it feels more appropriately paced. Did I explain that well? Oh, you want to talk about touch, do you? Oh, you want a roughhouse, huh? You want to get in with the big boys? You want to talk about touch, do you? Oh, well, touch is fantastic. It is an immaculately crafted piece of music that delights in all areas, corners, nooks, crannies, what have you. And speaking of Williamses, Paul Williams leads the track tremendously, first appearing as an ominous vocoded voice lost in a fog of discordant arpeggios and waves of synths, eventually recalling full vocal clarity, singing about touch next to a gorgeous sounding piano. I also can't help but gush about how just powerful his vocals are on some of these lines, like, tell me what you see, I need something more. It's great. Fight me. It's great. This leads into what I would consider to be almost a teaser for the next track on the album, with funky guitar grooves that always remind you of like a cheesy 70s or 80s cop parody. That then leads us to Daft Punk's vocals, which then get drowned out by this luscious choir. Near the end, when the climax of the track hits and the choir comes in more beautiful and powerful and confident than ever, the song just cuts out. And then it's just Paul and that piano again, leaving the song on an unfulfilled chord progression that leaves me with this triumphant sense of melancholy. This is just such a fantastic song, and it's one that I feel carries a lot of emotional weight and significance to its singer. Even though the song is not about Paul Williams per se, I think in his collaboration with Daft Punk and their discussions on how they wanted to make this song, I think there are parts of himself and his vulnerability that just magically found themselves within the music. Paul Williams is a very interesting person, and listening to him talk about his life and his sobriety in the companion interviews to this album, it seems like so much more went on when constructing this song than might appear on the surface. It truly feels like Daft Punk are this omniscient force that took Paul and his stories and his life and worked together with him to create something that transcends the personal influences of the music. This is probably my favorite track on the album, and I can't help but smile like a giddy fool every time I listen to it. And remember, this is a track that is greatly beneficial to listen to all the way through. This isn't one where you're gonna listen to the first 2 minutes, get that dopamine hit, and then say, all right, I'm off to the races. You need to listen to this in its entirety, and trust me, it is a rewarding listen. And it's also got 250 stems to it. 250! Songs used to be recorded on a 4-track, where you just have drums, guitar, bass, and a vocal, and that's it. This is 250 of those! Get Lucky, the tentpole track of Random Access Memories, and I think rightfully so. This acts as a fantastic homage to the 80s music that inspired it. Nile Rodgers kills it on the guitar with that signature rhythm guitar. It sounds so magical. The bass is sick, the vocals are sick, and Pharrell again on this track with just killing it on those high notes. And this is again where I have to acknowledge just how beautiful the drum sounds are on this track. Such a mighty snare and such a driving kick drum, and I love when the beat shifts when the robotic vocals come in. It's such a beautiful dance of all these different elements working together to create something that is just a beautiful earworm of a track. Another killer track, in my opinion. Everything just sounds so good. While the beginning reminds me of getting ready for another sick round of Mario Kart, it's such a mammoth of an opener that segues wonderfully into a slow jam, kinda, I guess? Headlined with lovely plucked guitars and another robotic yet beautiful delivery of a passionate passage. There's this beautiful reverbed guitar twang that kind of comes in and out in waves, and there's also a beautifully clean and tight acoustic guitar. It's a very guitar-heavy track. It's another example of how tight this album sounds and how excellently mixed it is to allow everything in the song to stand out and create this extraordinary stew of colorful sounds and vibrant instrumentation. It's such a track of ecstasy with its emotional strings and even more so appropriate lyrics to uplift the listener. It's another star track in my opinion. It's an oddity in the track listing for sure, but one that is incredibly worth it to listen to for that first minute alone. So much happens in the first minute of this track that it's just like an acoustic charcuterie. I've used this word before. It's like an acoustic charcuterie of wild sounds that just don't quit. You've got that slick bass lick, the watery bongos, the even more watery textures layered behind this, the jittering snares, the strings that come in that lead to this sick flute arpeggio. It's all so fantastic and rich with timbre and tone and texture. The song takes an unexpected turn when it leans fully into these synthetic water droplets that like plunge the listener in and out of this oceanic abyss, and then to which point the shakers from earlier come back in full force and pretty much bring the track back to its normal start. It's such a cool and interesting track, considering it's an oddity when compared to the other tracks on the album, but one that disrupts the full album listen in a good way, commanding your attention and acting almost as a palate cleanser for the closing songs of the record. These fragments of time. Lyrically, this song feels like the anthem for Random Access Memories. It reads the titular random memories of the album title and is about holding on to these random fragments of time that we hold in our minds, much like a computer's RAM holds on to everything stored on it, able to be recalled and brought up at a moment's notice. This is paired brilliantly with Todd Edwards' style of chopping up bits of songs and playing them back in his DJ sets. As well, he has a lovely voice that sings these lyrics with such fluent nostalgia in his tone. A lovely track anthemically, and appropriately a crucial track on the album. It's not one that I find myself revisiting all that often, but you can't skip it in a full album listen. You just can't. Todd Edwards got that style, he's got that style. Don't cramp. Don't cramp on the style. When the chorus comes in and it's like these fragments of time, and you hear like these little, the way he chops up the audio, and it's like fragments of time. It's a great musical sound alike to the lyrics being sung.
Doing it right, everybody will be dancing and we're feeling.
That's how you know it's good. That's how you know it's pretty good. Ooh. Another departure from the album's usual tones of 80s funk, but one that is also tied as probably my favorite track on the record, which is really saying something in terms of how Daft Punk crafts these songs, because this is a bare bones track when it comes to its instrumental. You got a dead simple drum machine beat paired with a plucked bass synth and beautiful vocals sung by Panda Bear, who absolutely kills it on this track, and with a few extra, robotic vocals sprinkled in. That's about it. This song is just so irresistibly catchy. I mean, you got that vocal line of, if you lose yourself tonight, that's how you know the magic's right. I can't help but just bob back and forth. It's such a catchy tune, man. It's such a frustratingly simple track, but Daft Punk use its minimalism to craft this reverbed space to lose oneself in, and allows the soul groove of the track to take hold of the listener and guide them through to the final track on the album. Contact. What a fucking send-off to a record. Listening to this, you can't help but feel like you are ascending far beyond space and time to a higher level, incomprehensible to even the album's capabilities. I mean, the track starts off with this epic organ piece, and one of the only instances on this album of sampling in Daft Punk's traditional sense with a song that already exists, that only gets more and more distorted as the song begins to lift with these ascending synths getting rougher and more compressed until the track itself feels like it's getting sucked into a black hole far beyond what we can see and imagine. It is something that is truly wild to listen to with your eyes closed. It's just out of this world. The group even contacted NASA and was given access to their mission recording archives. The band searched them, and Thomas insisted on something involving Gene Cernan, the last man as of right now to have walked on the moon. And that led to the sample that you can hear in the introduction of Contact. I stole that from a comment on the song for Contact on YouTube. So that wasn't written by me, but really cool, isn't it? That they went to NASA and was like, hey, we want something from this specific guy. Not the first man on the moon, but the last person to walk on the moon. It's so cool. Well, it's serendipitous. Is that the word? It's just serendipitous. It feels like it all just magically is there and is happening. It's so cool. And it is a wonderful climactic end to the record, but not the last track we're going to talk about today. Oh, you know what I'm going to say? Haha, you thought I wasn't going to talk about the bonus track, did you? No, you didn't. I see you there. You're just sitting there thinking, he's only going to talk about the 13 main tracks. He's not even going to touch on the Japanese exclusive release. Well, guess what? Look at us now! Horizon is a serene lullaby, tucking you in after the climactic end of the record, allowing you to contemplate amongst a starry night sky. The balladic acoustic guitars begin the song before the synths take hold and fully immerse you in this calming bed of the song. The warm synths sway your mind and body along to its rhythm, feeling cozy and fading out as it rests you back to reality after the tranquil journey you've just been on. It is truly a lovely track, especially after listening to Contact. And that's the track listing. Overall, roughly coming into about an hour and 18 minutes, and I just really, really love this album. There is just something completely indescribable about this album that just affects me emotionally and personally, and it's almost difficult to convey my passion for this album by just writing it down. Like it's something that I feel I will forever be tormented with, knowing just as a feeling and never being able to transcribe in any amount of words or paragraphs. The danceability of Get Lucky and Lose Yourself to Dance, and the luscious orchestras behind Giorgio By Moroder and Touch and Beyond, all of it just works together so well, and it affects me so passionately. And I can't think of another album experience I've had so far that has been so visceral as listening to Random Access Memories. I truly believe that it is something special, and it warms my heart whenever I read about the detail that went into constructing this album. It heightened my appreciation, knowing that this wasn't some sort of lightning strike of luck, but rather a carefully put together homage of the bands and music that Daft Punk themselves grew up listening to, and would eventually find themselves remixing into their own music. Now, with Random Access Memories, the band has come full circle, from being inspired by this era of music, to using it and sampling it in their own music, to creating music in an homage to that era. And while it is an interesting departure from their usual sound, a lot of people really liked this album, so much so that this happened.
And the Grammy goes to Random Access Memories, Daft Punk.
Featured artists: Julian Casablancas, DJ Falcon, Todd Edwards, Chili Gonzalez, Giorgio Moroder, Panda Bear, Mal Rogers, Paul Williams, and Pharrell Williams. Producers: Thomas Bangalter, Julian Casablancas, Guy-Manuel de Homem-Christo, Todd Edwards, and DJ Falcon.
That hug is probably the most heartwarming thing I've ever seen. I will frequently watch that video again every now and then, just to feel again the warmth and happiness and joyful tears that I get when witnessing this moment. So much is spoken through the passion of this moment. It's the culmination of their musical influences and their journey as revolutionary musicians to working with those musical influences and creating something that feels like a record that they would have grown up to be inspired by. That hug is such a heartwarming display of their friendship and dedication to their craft, and this album serves as the pinnacle of what they wanted to achieve in their music. So much love and care and detailed work and fantastic collaborations, all amounting not only to a fantastic record, but for this moment of recognition. I mean, the Grammys don't mean shit. Honestly, like it's kind of stupid to put an objective award to an album that, like this one, that's so like hell-bent on being something that's more about feeling than it is about critiquing. But the fact that they won when they did shows just how much this means to them, and you can see it through that hug. It is just an incredibly heartwarming moment, and one of the things that just continues to bring me such joy when it comes to this album, Random Access Memories. I hope you give this album a listen. You don't have to have such an appreciation for all of the little intricacies and the details and the behind the scenes like I do, but I really hope that you get some enjoyment from it like I did. Thank you so much for watching. That's the video.